This presentation describes a reconstruction of the evolution of the Middle Trojan language based on both ancient and modern sources. On the world of Calawan, there are several native species, including humans called the Tsurani, and a highly intelligent insect-like species known as the Choja. The study of linguistics on Calawan was founded by the Tsurani, and even after alliances were established between the Tsuranuani and several Choja hives, linguistic study primarily revolved around the world's human languages. However, by combining interdimensional linguistic experience from Earth with expertise of our collaborator Kokokku and other Choja linguists, we are innovating and pushing reconstructive techniques to languages of non-human species, including the Choja. Before discussing the language of the Choja, we need to establish some facts about their biology that influence the characteristics and evolution of the language. The Choja outwardly resemble the ants known to us on Earth, only much larger, the larger even than humans. Other notable differences include a silk gland, allowing them to produce fibres for crafting or building, and the development of additional tractable appendages on the front and middle pairs of legs, which allows for greater object manipulation. Like earth ants, the Choja have no vocal organs. Instead, they can generate sounds through the use of stridulation. Stridulation is a technique for generating sound which on Earth is used most famously by crickets, but has also been observed in some species of ants. It involves rubbing together certain body parts to produce sounds of different frequencies. Since the Choja are scaled up significantly compared to Earth insects, the sounds they produce are generally much lower and louder than you would hear on Earth, even though the physical mechanisms are similar. The Choja have 3 stridulatory organs, one at the head, one at the thorax, and one at the abdomen. The head organ is found in the neck, and produces sound through subtle side-to-side movements of the head. The abdominal organ is similar, found in the petiole, and produces sound through the movements of the gaster. Finally, the organ at the thorax is found on the underside of the individual, and produces sound through stimulation by a scraper near the base of the middle pair of legs. Each of these organs can produce several different sounds by changing the frequency and length of the stridulations. The Choja can also produce sound by rubbing their legs together, but this was rare even by the time of Middle Trojan, and is almost never used today. Additionally, female Choja are born with wings and can vibrate them to generate additional sounds, although only high-class females such as queens and murari, the lesser queens who lay the eggs, utilise this to linguistic effect. Although the Choja had never previously developed spoken language, they still had ways of communicating. The most common way before language emerged was chemical, making use of pheromones. Pheromone communications are simplistic and can dissipate quickly if not maintained, but this was rarely an issue due to the sheer number of Choja in a hive, which sources suggest could be as many as 20,000, although none of the hives which have been directly observed so far have had this many. Pheromone communication was never fully supplanted by language due to their differing purposes. For example, pheromones are more basal and instinctual, so they have a greater impact than spoken word alone. They also provide a more efficient system of communication for common activities in the hive, such as finding food. In addition, they are location-based rather than speaker-based. Despite these factors, spoken language still provides several distinct advantages over pheromones, so the Choja began teaching both systems to their young. By the time of Middle Trojan, speech and pheromones had begun being used in tandem. We will discuss this feature later. Before we describe the evolution of the Trojan language, we need to discuss why the Choja developed spoken language in the first place, when they already had a communication system. The reason for this is contact with the Eldar. The Eldar were a sect of elves originally from the world of Midkemia, where they were lawkeepers for the Valharu, or Dragon Lords. Roughly 2,000 years ago, a series of conflicts known as the Chaos Wars forced the Eldar to flee to other worlds, and one group of them ended up on Calawan, where they encountered the Choja. Information sources from before the Chaos Wars are rare, but what we do know is that the Eldar spoke an ancient form of Elvish, older even than the language spoken by most Midkemian elves at that time, and that this language bore a striking resemblance to the Finnish language spoken on Earth, the phonology of which is given here. M, N, Ng, P, B, T, R, K, G, S, H, R, L, Y, R, I, U, U, I, E, O, A. The orthography of Ancient Elvish is perfectly regular, with the exception of ng, which only appears in digraphs as either nk or ng. This makes ng the only irregular phoneme in the language. We now briefly need to cover the grammar of Ancient Elvish, as many elements of it are particularly relevant to discussion of Middle Trojan. The language is agglutinative, with many different inflections and affixes to add additional meaning. As a result, word order is free. Starting with the nouns, there are the common nominative and genitive cases, though notably not the accusative, which only remains for personal pronouns. Instead, the object of a verb will usually be in the nominative, genitive, or partitive form, with the choice of case sometimes altering the precise meaning of the phrase. The above-mentioned partitive case, when used as the object, can indicate that the action is irresolutive or atelic, whereas the other cases are telic. When the verb is negated, however, the object is almost always in the partitive case, regardless of telicity. The partitive case is also used with amounts. Uncountable and abstract nouns are declined in the partitive when they are the object of a phrase and after a number or quantifier. Beyond the basic noun cases, Ancient Elvish also has a locative system, which makes a three-way distinction between entering, exiting, and being in a state. There are three states that have locatives. The first can be described as internal, illative, elative, and inessive, and refer to going into, coming out of, and being in a place. Then there is the external state, allative, ablative, and adessive, which refer to going to, coming from, and being at a place. And finally the stative, translative, non-standard excessive, and essive, which are used to mean changing into, changing out of, and being in a state of being. The locative cases can be used for more than just their direct meanings as well, with their many abstract and metaphorical uses providing similar functionality to English prepositions. For example, the elative can be used to indicate origin, as in made out of, and the adessive can have an instrumental meaning, as in with a knife. As with the basic cases, sometimes the verb used requires the object to be in a specific locative case, which doesn't necessarily correlate to its standard usage. Additionally, there are a few nominal forms, such as the instructive, abessive, and commutative, which, although rare in speech, are abundant in the Eldar's collection of Elvish literature, particularly poetry. Each case has a singular and plural variant. The plural form is marked with an infix after the noun stem, but before the standard case ending. Nominative plurals deviate from this rule, perhaps because they do not have a fixed case ending, and instead the plural is marked with a suffix. Furthermore, nouns can be marked with a possessive suffix in addition to or in place of the genitive of the corresponding personal pronoun, with the endings distinguishing person and number. Verb inflections in Ancient Elvish are no less complex than the nouns. There are 4 tense aspect forms and 4 moods, as well as distinguishing active and passive voice. The tenses are present, imperfect or simple past, perfect, and pluperfect. The perfect tenses use the past participle with the verb to be, with the perfect tense using the present form and the pluperfect using the past. This is similar to the usage of have and had in English. In terms of moods, the indicative and imperative are the most common in speech, but Ancient Elvish also has a conditional mood, which expresses an action being contingent on another, and a potential mood, which expresses an action being possible but uncertain. The conditional is significantly more integrated into common language than the potential, and can be used for politeness. It's important to note that the simple past and pluperfect tenses only exist in the indicative mood. The imperative has mostly present forms, but in the third person it can be analysed as yussive instead, which has a perfect form. For negation, there is a negating verb, and a separate con-negative form that only conjugates for plurality and the simple tenses in each mood, which is used on the following verb. Elvish verbs also have a complex system of infinitives and participles. The first infinitive is the standard version, the second is inflected in either the inessive or instructive, and is used alongside the main verb to describe the manner or means in which it occurs. The third infinitive is used in a number of different cases for an auxiliary action to the main verb, corresponding to the gerund in English. The first and third infinitives are frequently used in more complex phrases, when multiple verbs are needed to fully express a concept, especially with verbs that expect others to be in specific forms. The last of the verb forms are the participles. The past participles are seen throughout the perfect forms, and the present participles function very typically. Both of these have active and passive variants. The agent participle is more unusual and expresses the property of being the object of the verb's action. Finally, adjectives in Ancient Elvish agree in case with the noun they describe, and come before the noun. Adverbs do not inflect with their verb. However, there is a set of so-called adverbial cases. In our opinion, these are better categorised with the many derivational suffixes, since the cases are applied to nouns. Additionally, both adjectives and adverbs have regular forms for the comparative and superlative degree. Many of these grammatical features are foundational to the Trojan language and therefore remain unchanged to this day, although there are some deviations in the grammar which we will touch on later. Because of the Trojans' high intelligence and capacity for language learning, the Eldar were able to teach them Ancient Elvish, aided by magic of course. The aforementioned anatomical differences necessitated several adjustments to the phonology of Ancient Elvish to allow the Trojan to pronounce it, thus leading to the development of Old Trojan. Due to the relationship between Ancient Elvish and Trojan, we've taken inspiration from the phonetics of Ancient Elvish and used the corresponding Latin letters to notate Trojan words for the majority of this presentation, for example in Kokokku's name. Thanks to the Eldar being excellent record keepers, several contemporary sources about Old Trojan remain intact even 2 millennia later. Unfortunately, the Eldar secluded themselves to an unknown location in the Arctic not long after they arrived on Calawan, so the process of how the language evolved into the form spoken today was largely a mystery. Before this research began, that is. When comparing Trojan to Ancient Elvish, one of the most striking differences is the phonology, which had to be heavily modified to be pronounceable using the Choja stridulatory organs. The consonants of Ancient Elvish can generously be interpreted as 5 groups of 3, as shown here. Since the Choja have much fewer distinct sound production mechanisms, the columns of the above table, which roughly correspond to manner of articulation, are reinterpreted in a variety of ways into rhythm. The plosive sounds are low frequency pulses, which would be heard as a clicking sound. The voiceless set, called weak click, are short, and the voiced set, called strong click, are long. The fricatives and liquids are high frequency pulses, which would be heard as a buzzing sound. The fricatives, called weak buzz, are short, and the liquids, called strong buzz, are long. The nasal sounds, called medials, are a short, high-frequency pulse followed by a short, low-frequency pulse. They are always considered long, or strong. Kokokku will demonstrate these sounds now. Under this system, it can be hard to differentiate medials from weak buzz-click consonant clusters. For example, this problem is alleviated somewhat by later changes. Trojan vowels are represented by a series of rapid pulses. These pulses are either short or long. The long pulse is considered the standard pulse, with short pulses taking on an almost unstressed quality. The pattern used for each vowel is determined by its class, and to form a long vowel, the pattern is simply reduplicated. At this point, it's worth clarifying that yes, both consonants and vowels differentiate length. This means that a given syllable can be short, long, or long, based on the configuration of consonants and vowels. Ancient Elvish featured vowel harmony, and in Old Trojan, this was represented through the use of a harmony marker, which is a shorter pulse that precedes the main sequence and changes in pitch. For front vowels, it's low to high, and for back vowels, it's high to low. For neutral vowels, the harmony marker remains at a constant pitch, and is equivalent to a regular unstressed pulse. All of this gives us the following table of vowels. Due to the introduction of tones, we've named the harmonies in Trojan after the tones, rather than the corresponding Elvish vowel qualities. Seemingly one of the first changes to occur to the vowels was that the pitch change of the harmony marker morphed into a tone on the whole syllable. It's thought that, sometime after this, the harmony marker pulse weakened into a fixed mid-tone that purely marked vowel boundaries, and later elided completely into the following long pulse. These changes bring us to the vowel sounds of Middle Trojan, which Kokokku will demonstrate now. Note that, in this presentation, high vowels are marked with an umlaut, low vowels with the circumflex, and neutral vowels with the macron. In Old Trojan, vowel pulses were bicrural, made by rubbing the legs together. But due to the impracticality of doing this while walking somewhere or performing a task, bicrural pulses became less common, with many Choja shifting to repeating the consonant sound in the vowels pattern instead. In the late Trojan of today, initial vowels have almost completely elided in colloquial speech. However, some female Choja, particularly queens, still articulate initial vowels, but rather than generating bicrural pulses with their legs, they use their wings to generate aletal sounds. From this, we can deduce that the elision of initial vowels is likely a fairly recent development, and so speakers of Middle Trojan probably still use bicrural pulses in this specific case. It's fashionable for high-class females to articulate vowel sounds with their wings, as it places them into a different register from the common worker and drone Choja, especially seeing as the higher classes don't fly very much. In Ancient Elvish, only the front and back vowels affected the vowel harmony of a word, with neutral vowels able to fit into words of either harmony. Affixes and inflections with vowels of the incorrect harmony had to shift to match the harmony of the base word, although neutral vowels and inflections did not shift. In Trojan, however, a true neutral harmony emerged in words featuring only neutral vowels. For some reason, words that featured the high A-class vowel in a non-initial syllable but were otherwise neutral seemingly also counted for this. This harmony acts the same as the high and low harmonies, preventing non-neutral vowels from occurring in the word. This likewise affects inflections, so high and low vowels and inflections shift to become neutral. As a result, a neutral A-class vowel emerged, Ancient Elvish didn't have this vowel, but in Trojan such a vowel can easily be derived by combining the neutral harmony marker with the A-class pattern, as shown here. Shortly after the emergence of true neutral harmony, inflections changed to strictly follow word harmony, so inflectional neutral vowels also shifted when applied to a word of differing harmony. Despite this, neutral vowels can still appear in words of high or low harmony, just not in inflections. Putting all these harmony changes together, we get inflectional endings with 3 variations, each conforming to a different vowel harmony. For example, the first person possessive suffix, shown here, would inflect like so. Vowel shifts appear to have been common and wide-reaching in the evolution of Middle Trojan. At some point, the lower neutral O-class monophthongs mutated to A-class, except in the inflection for the allative case, which retained its O-class vowel to prevent ambiguity with the adessive inflection. We think that this shift to A-class occurred as part of a chain shift that also caused the neutral OU diphthong and the low O neutral U diphthong to lose their final vowel. Later, a neutralizing shift began acting on full harmony diphthongs, those where both vowels have matching harmony, outside of inflections. Specifically, the second vowel in the diphthong shifted to its neutral equivalent. Another example of a vowel shift is the mutation of all short vowels in the first syllable of a word. Specifically, O-class vowels lengthened, while A-class and U-class vowels went to these diphthongs. Note that harmony was maintained in this change, except for the neutral A in the final case. Perhaps one of the starkest changes to how words look in Middle Trojan compared to Old Trojan was the emergence of intervocalic consonants. In short, consonant sounds began appearing between pairs of vowels, especially in full harmony diphthongs and neutralizing diphthongs, but notably never in true neutral harmony. The rules determining exactly which consonant appears in any given word are still uncertain, but we think that other nearby consonants influence some of the properties, especially with regards to place of articulation. We were also able to reconstruct a chain shift on vowels that seems to have occurred at the same time. These shifted from A to U, and from U to a UO diphthong, with an intervocalic appearing in the diphthong. The reason we can confidently associate these two changes is because the intervocalic consonant that appears is also found in true neutral harmony, even though intervocalics normally do not occur there. This indicates the shift happened sometime during or after the emergence of intervocalic consonants, with the neutral harmony intervocalic likely being a hypercorrection. Sometime after this, doubled vowels began exchanging places with adjacent geminated consonants. Word initially, the vowel did not need to be doubled for this change to take effect, and similarly for single word final consonants. This naturally broke up doubled vowels and consonants, producing additional syllables. The final set of vowel changes we were able to identify apply only in true neutral harmony, and they behave rather strangely. This bizarre set of changes include neutral U lengthening before weak click consonants, and the neutral OU diphthong before weak consonants, strengthening them into a strong click. Weirdest of all, neutral A becomes the neutral AU diphthong, except in the first or third syllable, unless one of those is part of an inflection. These 3 changes are some of the most cursed in the language's development. Based on the more recent ancient sources we have access to, we can determine that probably one of the earliest grammatical changes was the addition of a future tense particle, similar to the negation particle. This particle appears to have evolved from a future tense construction used in ancient Elvish, specifically the word aikwa, which meant will do, or intend to do. The future particle can also be used with the verb to be, to create the future perfect tense, in a similar manner to the pre-existing perfect and pluperfect tenses. The future perfect can roughly be translated into English as will have done. The future tenses are found only in the indicative, imperative and potential moods, and seemingly never emerged at all in the conditional mood. We hypothesize this is because the conditional already implicitly connotes the future. The future tenses are formed in a few different ways depending on context. In positive constructions, the future particle always inflects for person and plurality. In the simple future, the main verb is in the present participle form. In the future perfect indicative mood, the verb to be is in the present participle form, and the main verb is in the past participle form. In the future perfect imperative and potential moods, the verb to be agrees with the future particle and person and number, and the main verb is in the past participle form. In negative constructions, everything aside from the negative verb, and the main verb if in the future perfect, is in the connegative form. Another notable grammatical difference between Ancient Elvish and Middle Trojan is differing default word order. Because of the specificity of cases in both languages, word order is broadly very free, but Elvish speakers would have typically used subject-verb-object order. However, in the limited text that the Choja had access to after the Eldar vanished, object-verb-subject order was used much more frequently than usual, so this was adopted as the default, with the exception of questions which use verb-object-subject. At some point, due to the underground lifestyle of the Choja, 2 new noun cases developed: the subessive case, which roughly means underneath, and the sublative case, which roughly means downwards. When combined with the cases inherited from Ancient Elvish, this gives 4 total groups of locative cases. Note that the sublative ending is one of the only situations we can find where vowel harmony in inflections is violated. The vowel stays neutral in words of all harmonies. We hypothesize that this is because the endings were derived from older constructions that made use of the genitive with a separate adverb meaning below. Additionally, these new cases would later come to be used in a metaphorical sense, denoting things of lesser importance or relevance. For example, note the use of the subessive case in the following phrase. A while later, an infix developed to mark the superplural, referring to pluralities in the order of thousands, most often used when discussing entire hives. The T is omitted when preceded by a consonant, likewise, the A is omitted when followed by a vowel. Exactly where this infix originated from is unclear, but folk etymologies suggest derivation either from a term meaning 1,000, or, in the infix's high form, from an intensifier meaning more and more. The last set of changes we were able to reconstruct surround the development of consonant harmony, also known as or colour harmony. Like vowel harmony, this feature serves to make the consonants in a word more consistent, specifically by shifting them to use the same stridulatory organ. The organ used for a word's harmony is based first on which is the most common among that word's consonants, but otherwise certain rules dictate which organ takes precedence. We're not entirely sure what these rules are, but it appears that short, low-frequency sounds, the weak clicks, take precedence over long, high-frequency sounds, the strong buzzes, with medials ranking higher than the buzz consonants but lower than the click consonants. Word-forming derivational affixes affect the harmony of the words they attach to, but inflections change their consonants to match the harmony of the word they apply to instead, like with vowel harmony. This means that by some analyses, there are 9 different forms of every inflection. Note that with clustered consonants, only the first follows harmony, and the other is anti-harmonized. This allows for co-articulation, which is another feature that we think developed around this time. This means that multiple stridulatory organs produce sounds at the same time. The harmony shift is arbitrary, but is conventionally determined by the following vowel. The second sound in the cluster changes length to match the first, if applicable. For the purposes of the transcription, we have changed the second consonant to match the strength of the first, unless either sound is a medial. Finally, the combined effects of harmony and co-articulation rules seems to have caused many words to become ambiguous. It's theorized that this was rectified by the addition of amplitude contours, a variation in loudness over the course of the word, as these are recognizable in late Trojan. Some unambiguous words also receive these contours by association with the ambiguous ones. Which contours are used for which sounds is only somewhat predictable, and patterns are hard to identify, so unfortunately we can't go into depth about them in this presentation. We think that this feature was one of the last to emerge in the evolution of Middle Trojan, but we can't say for sure exactly when it developed. Now that we've described all the changes that we've been able to reconstruct, we can have a look at the inflection of some example words in Middle Trojan. First, a table of noun inflections. Note that all of the nominal forms shown here can have one of 5 possessive suffixes attached, though they haven't been shown here for the sake of brevity. Next, a table of verb inflections. Wow, that one was a bit long. One of the most interesting things to note about the development of Middle Trojan is that words generally got significantly longer. There is some evidence to suggest that some of the syllables are redundant, but aiding comprehension in environments where communication is likely to be distorted, including over very long distances. Because all the sounds in a word depend on each other due to harmonies, intervocalics and co-articulation among others, it's possible to understand spoken Trojan even if some syllables are lost or misheard. We hope that this area will be researched at a deeper level in the future. As mentioned earlier, the development of spoken language did not supplant traditional pheromone communications. In fact, they came to be used alongside each other to convey additional meaning. The Choja are capable of producing 6 distinct pheromone signals. In speech, words and phrases can be marked by releasing a pheromone. This creates emphasis and provides additional context for the listeners beyond just the semantic information. Let Gokokku provide an example. The exact meanings of the pheromones shifted over time as spoken language developed more, and the need for quick chemical commands or warnings decreased. For example, the aggression pheromone originally had a much narrower definition of territorial, but this broadened to allow for wider use in speech. Likewise, the familiarity pheromone evolved from aggregation, which would have been used to command the hive to congregate or form up against a threat. By the time of Middle Trojan, this pheromone was being used to mark objects that are well known to the speaker, especially ones they have a positive opinion of. The only exception to this broadening of meanings is the death pheromone, which even today is heavily stigmatized in Choja society and is only ever used as a warning of imminent death or of a dead creature. Out of this set of 6, the knowledge pheromone is of particular linguistic interest. It developed from the trail pheromone used by the Choja to mark the way to important sites. In speech, however, it became a marker of presupposed pieces of information, or universal truths, and it later developed to secondary usage as a topic marker, indicating concepts that were referred to earlier in the speech or conversation. The ancient Elvish writing system was known to the Choja, but they had little need for written text outside of communication with the Eldar. However, a ceremonial writing system was developed for use by the upper classes, including the Queen. This system gradually proliferated and is now used even by workers across many Choja hives. The Choja, being an underground people, developed into excellent miners. This meant that they were highly capable of extracting the world's natural underground resources. While on some worlds metal ores are the most common of these, on Kelowon, metal is scarce. Instead, gemstones are highly abundant. As a result of this, jewellery made from stones of striking shapes and colours threaded on Choja silk has long been popular, even before the Chaos Wars, especially with the nobles of the hives. From these factors, a new writing system emerged. The 3 stridulatory organs each came to be represented by a different stone, and eventually a different colour, hence the name colour harmony, as described earlier. Meanwhile, the manner of articulation was encoded by the stone's cut, or shape. For colour, garnet, jade and amethyst are the most common precious stones of their respective colours, so the categories were named after them, but any stone of a matching colour will be understood. Often, higher class Choja will use rarer and more valuable stones in the place of the traditional ones, like ruby instead of garnet, or sapphire instead of amethyst, because blue is apparently considered allochromatic to purple. Additionally, Choja archaeologists have recovered jewellery from the Middle Trojan period made out of non-precious stones. It's thought that these may have been coloured with some kind of paint, or some researchers suggest the brightly coloured blood of hostile creatures. Vowel patterns are represented by different sized stones in sequence, with large stones representing long pulses and smaller stones representing short pulses. You might notice that vowel harmony isn't encoded anywhere in the stone, and that's true. Instead, harmony is marked by different complex knots in the silk the stones are threaded on, with knots of this style for high vowel harmony and this style for low vowel harmony. These harmony knots are tied around all the stones in a word regardless of size, which can make written words appear quite complex at first glance. As the use of stones for writing became more widespread, the 3 stridulatory organs each came to be named after their respective gemstone. For the postcranial, for the cruroventral, and for the petiola. In addition, bicrural consonants came to be represented by stones of white or grey, such as quartz, and these came to be called meaning colourless. Now, there aren't any Unicode symbols for different colours and shapes of stones yet, so in order to make Trojan writing representable on Earth computers, we've developed a mapping that uses symbols already present in Unicode. Consonants are encoded by differently coloured and shaped emoji. For vowels, rather than having an additional smaller set of consonant emoji, we just use Latin vowel letters. Vowel class is encoded by the letter, and harmony by the diacritic, in accordance with the notation that we've been using throughout this presentation. Okay, some of the consonant emoji are a bit of a stretch, especially in the weak click and strong buzz rows, but it's really the best we could do with the characters that already exist. Let's just hope the Unicode Consortium add Trojan stones soon. Additionally, pheromones are also represented by emoji in this system. With all that said and done, we can finally present an excerpt from a translation of Kalev's seminal work, Observations and Investigations into the Creatures of the Western Continents, as performed by Kokoku. Thank you for watching this presentation on the evolution of Middle Trojan. It truly is a remarkable language, with having evolved from a language known in our dimension, being adapted to fit non-human phonetics, and even developing a rock-based writing system. Plus, with the lack of records from the time, this project is almost reminiscent of reconstructing a proto-language from later evidence, a posteriori if you will. It certainly tells a story of what the Choja people were like in the past.